Introductions. So pick a person on the screen and we'll hand it off to you, and they'll hand it off to you, and then you hand it off to somebody else on the screen. So let's see. I'm Carol Fall. I am the current chair of the Fire Safe Council and assistant chief at the Trinity Center Volunteer Fire Department. I'm going to hand it off to, let's see, Tom March. Did I see you there?
Tom March, landscape specialist, Caltrans for Trinity County. And hand it off to Blaze Shannon.
Hi, I'm Blaze Shannon. I'm the Board of Directors Treasurer for the Willow Creek Fire Safe Council, and I will hand it off to Jerry Cousins.
Hi there, I'm Jerry Cousins, Weaverville resident and collaborative member. And I'll hand it off to Chris at RCD.
This is Chris Cole from the RCD. I'm the Forest Health Program Manager. I'll go to Scott Conway.
Hey everybody, Scott Conway. I'm the Chief Resilient Officer for Vibrant Planet. You're going to hear a little bit more from us later on. So good to see some of you again and good to meet others. Let's go with Joe, who's also from Vibrant Planet.
Hey, good afternoon. Joe Flannery, Vibrant Planet. Scott just said I'm the Community Relations Lead. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for making the time for us today. We'll be presenting in a little bit, I do believe. Let's see. Did Denise go already?
Hi, Denise Wesley, GIS Manager for the Trinity County Resource Conservation District, and I will hand it off to Blaze Shannon.
Did Blaze go?
Yeah.
Okay, I will hand it off to Bethany.
Hi, I'm Bethany. I'm in the Forest Health Office at the Trinity County RCD as well, and I'll hand it to Maya Williams.
Hi, Maya Williams, Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Trinity County Resource Conservation District. I'll hand it off to Dylan.
Hi everyone, Dylan Beatty, Forestry and Fuels Program Director at the Watershed Center. I'll hand it off and introduce our new Fire Ops Program Managers, Ellen McGahee and Quaylen Bernstein, if they are online.
Hi there, yeah, and this is Ellen, and as Dylan said, we're newly in fire operations in Trinity County with the Watershed Center. I will hand it to Dylan. You want to pick somebody? My screen's not working.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave Johnson.
Howdy, I'm Dave Johnson. I'm the Forest Health Coordinator at the Trinity County Resource Conservation District, and I will hand it off to Josh Kozine.
Josh, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself? So Josh is a reporter with the Trinity Journal. He's still muted. Okay, so who are we missing in terms of introductions? Who hasn't introduced themselves yet?
Keith and Basho.
I'll introduce myself, Keith Greenwood, Chair of Industries in Weaverville. And let's go with anyone else who hasn't introduced themselves either.
Basho.
Look like Jerry Cousins maybe, huh?
Basho.
Hi everyone, my name is Basho Parks. I'm representing the Lower Trinity River Prescribed Burn Association. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Okay, is that everyone coming in through Zoom? Anybody we missed? Okay, and so here in the office we have Jill joining us. Jill.
Hi, Jill Cox, Trinity County Board of Supervisors.
And you've already met Amelia Flights, who is our Fire Safe Council Coordinator. Okay, so those are introductions. Welcome.
Hey, Carol, this is Jerry. I'd just like to ask a question about the organization, the Lower Trinity River Prescribed Burn Association?
Sure. Do you want to have Basho? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're doing real quick?
Thanks.
Yeah, we're a prescribed burn association in the greater Willow Creek area, as well as the South Fork of the Trinity. We're interested in doing private parcel burns with landowners ongoing, as well as larger landscape projects in the future. We believe that prescribed fire is the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to fighting fire and preventing wildland fires from melting our river corridor communities.
Great, thank you.
And if you do Facebook, they have a great Facebook page that talks about all the stuff they're doing.
Okay, thanks again.
So do we have any additions or changes to the agenda?
We are going to strike the grants, the letter of support for Forest Service. They've decided not to apply.
Okay, so we're striking grants. Item B, the Forest Service letter of support to them for a forest health grant. Okay, so then we'll move on to presentations and we'll turn it over to Vibrant Planet to talk about their land tender software.
Yeah, hi. What's the time slot that we have? Just so we're not spending too much time on things.
Now until 2:15.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll be quicker than that and give you guys some time back. So really quickly, my name's Scott. I'm the Chief Resilient Officer here for Vibrant Planet. My most of my career was spent with the Forest Service. I actually came out to the Sierra Nevadas in 1999 and worked with the Quincy Library Group Collaborative way back when, and eventually wore a lot of different hats in the Forest Service, everything from civiculturist to wildfire to district ranger, ultimately at the remote sensing lab, really trying to operationalize the data that we all use and scale it so it's connected to the decision makers all the way to the folks on the ground. So we have developed land tender. We have shown it to a few different entities here, RCD and Watershed Center, and so they were interested in potentially deploying it in parts of Trinity County. And I think they just had the idea to show y'all kind of what we have shown them, more just for informational, not necessarily decision at this point, although I'll let the RCD jump in if they have more to say with regards to the goals here. With that said, I'm going to jump in just with a real quick background of Vibrant Planet, and then I'm going to pass it on to Joe, and he's going to actually dive into the software and show what it does. Does the RCD have anything to add here before I get going?
We're very excited about the potential opportunity, and the Watershed Center and the RCD are working collaboratively to see about bringing this program to Trinity County across multiple agencies for future planning. So we appreciate all those who came today to learn about this opportunity, and the Watershed Center and the RCD will be looking forward to coordinating future meetings for local coordination on this.
Cool, awesome. And y'all can see my screen okay? Great. Okay, so Vibrant Plan, of course, our company. Land Tender is our first decision support software that we're deploying across the state of California. We're going to talk about where we are deploying that, and there's some strategic areas. Our goal is to cover the entire state, although as we all know, it's the way you get traction and buy-in in these things is to really focus on these ground level projects that generate use, and then that tends to drive adoption at the higher levels versus trying to say, you know, hey, we have some of the state, you should use it down here. Really focus on the ground level implementation support. So that's why we're focused and working with y'all. That's why we've kind of strategically moved in different places in the landscape across California that strategically have kind of this infrastructure, so to speak, this social infrastructure to incorporate something like this. Really quickly, Vibrant Planet itself we began as a nonprofit. However, we recognize that there is a significant data engineering challenge here. And not saying that a nonprofit can't house rockstar data engineers, just for us to spin those engineers and bring them from, lure them away from Silicon Valley, keep them from spying on your conversations and using their skills to actually improve our natural wildlands. We recognize that we had to have a public benefit corporation side of things where we could offer them the kind of benefits and pay that they would get at the Googles and the Facebooks, but really solve the problems that we think are more important. So we developed this nonprofit, which serves as now our data commons. And that means that any data we produce, we curate, we house, we gift back to the data commons. They make that publicly available for scientists and public to use. But then our public benefit corporation side, where we've spun up and of course brought in some natural resource scientists, foresters, silviculturists, and land managers, along with those data engineers, is creating the applications to really operationalize that data and make it useful and applicable to the decisions that you have to make on the ground, all the way up to making decisions at the county level. Really quick on our team, we have a host of different land managers and scientists. Those that are familiar with Hugh Safford, he was the Region 5 ecologist. He now retired and has joined Vibrant Planet. There's some other land managers that some of you may be familiar with if you've worked with folks at the Forest Service in Region 5. But we've also combined those with some sound engineering, again, to really deal with this data engineering challenge of not only assimilating the data, but then being able to scale it and package it for different end users. We also have some policy advisors, but then also kind of the business side to make sure that we stay sound. Before I pass it off to Joe, there's just really three things that I think at a high level, what we think land tender does is a value add, not a replacement, is that it really improves the communications that we all depend on for making timely decisions. And Joe will get into that. The other piece is that we're always focused on updating, because it's a cloud-based subscription as a service piece of software. So we're always focused on updating the information in the application. So you're always planning, whether that's adaptively or you're planning into the future, you're using the most current information. And this has been a challenge. One of the reasons why I moved into this space is a consulting driven process can tend to be very linear, and you produce a plan as a paper-based output. Well, once you produce it, a fire happens or treatments start getting rolled out in landscape, that plan becomes obsolete because the landscape fire dynamics change. So in order to really have that adaptive management planning, you need those up-to-date pieces of information and modeling efforts within a software package that you can always rely on as being somewhat current. And then finally, because we are really focused on building the data at the implementation scale, meaning making it useful for the folks making decisions on the ground, not replacing the need for them to actually go and do the work on the ground, but making their work more efficient. By serving their needs and scaling that information up, we can tie to these different scales. So we're not all operating in our different silos of decisions. We're all using the same data, albeit packaged differently, to effectively come to the same conclusions since we have the same goals. And then finally, just kind of where we're at right now on the landscapes in California. The different colors kind of show different stages of the process where we have land tender deployed. Clearly, the north and northeastern part of the state is an area that we're really interested in going for a lot of really good reasons. But otherwise, the majority of our work right now is focused on the Central Sierra, as well as the Southern Chaparral region. So really trying to hit these different ecotypes across the state, learning a lot, and of course, hopefully applying some sound management practices in short order here. So with that said, I'm going to transfer to Joe here. And then if we have time, we may come back to me and I might show some of the iterations we're doing, like kind of the land tender 2.0, so you can kind of see what's coming up next.
Cool. Let's actually get into land tender. Before we do, though, we're going to talk about we're going to tell essentially a little collaborative story. Now, I've already spoken with some of the folks in this room, and you guys are taking collaboration to a whole new level. And what you're doing is obviously going to be a little more complex than this short story that I can fit into the next 15 minutes here. So hats off to you guys. And like Scott said, I did work for the U.S. Forest Service for the last 10 years myself before joining the Vibrant Planet. I was in these exact spaces, right? I was in rooms just like the ones you guys are in right now. I was working on key stakeholder engagement, seeing what we could do to accomplish work on the ground. And I will say you guys' reputation precedes itself, especially when it comes to chunking off big pieces of prescribed fire. So hats off to the folks in the group. So, not only in my experience in the Forest Service, but as right now through Vibrant Planet, we're talking with folks up and down the state. And this is the collaborative story that we're going to kind of tell. And this is a collaborative story that we're seeing happening all over the place. You folks are going to be a little ahead of this group that we're going to demo here. But again, this is just for simplicity's sake. So right now, all over the place, all over this arid Mediterranean landscape, we have new collaboratives and new groups are forming. And why are they forming, right? Well, it's pretty easy. It's just like this. You have this watershed down here, and just above the watershed to the north, really large fire a couple of years ago. 300, over 300,000 acres. And folks in this watershed down here, they're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but they're not going to sit around. They're going to try and do something about it. So they're forming groups just like yourselves. They're getting that administrative infrastructure in place with our shared stewardship agreements to work on public lands, etc. So let's actually meet a few of these folks. And again, this is based on a true story, but the names have been changed. And also these are pictures of Vibrant Planet employees, much to their chagrin. They find themselves in a presentation that I gave all the time. So let's meet a few of these collaborative members. We have the hypothetical Forestry Department and Forester Scott. So Forester Scott cares about forest resilience. He cares about carbon sequestration, and he cares about water security. Well, he's always cared about forest resilience, right? But now with the new grant cycles and the new needs in the state and the different emphasis put on carbon sequestration, he wants to see if forest treatments have some carbon benefit, and maybe the local water district has offered some funding if Forester Scott can prove that forest treatments can add to forest supply. Now I'm going to show you what each person cares about, because when we get into land tender, we're actually going to design our treatments based on those values. So it's a cool system that we can actually design treatments and prioritize treatments based on the things that we care about. And we'll show you what we mean. And also Forester Scott in the Forestry Department have done some great work in this watershed already. Scott's been in here planning for years. He wants to make sure that the great work he's already done can be incorporated into land tender and used to make future landscape assessment and future resilience plans. New face to this space, we have County Supervisor Tori. And of course, first and foremost, she cares about catastrophic wildfire, right? Her constituents are calling her. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're all watching the news. They're all afraid of what's going to happen with July through October. And maybe County Supervisor wasn't trained in forestry and fire ecology. So she has to kind of learn as she goes and learn as she goes. And she also cares about not just those local houses, because even if we can perform point protection, she's also worried about that recreation-based economy. Even if the homes are protected, but those vistas, those fishing access points, those hunting zones, if they all burn, that recreation-based economy might bottom out. And of course, we also have the Biodiversity Foundation, and we have Biologist Joe. Now, Biologist Joe has been a little critical of the Forestry Department over the years. He's a little wary of working with them in a collaborative environment. What he cares most about are meadows and aspen stands. He actually likes to hunt himself. And so he cares not just that from a biodiversity standpoint, but also about deer forage. He also cares about spotted owl habitat and the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog habitat. And our demo is going to be focused on the west slope of the Central Sierra. So these are all hypotheticals here. The Biodiversity Foundation has been a litigant of the Forestry Department in the past. So maybe we're going to see if they can all work together for the first time, and maybe land tender can help that a little bit as well. So as these new collaboratives form, long list of tasks they have to do. Let's take a look at a short, brief example of all the tasks at hand. Well, first they have to plan an initial forest resilience project, just some sort of pilot kickoff project. Within that planning project, they have to prioritize treatments. And let's give them some incentive. Let's give them $1 million. Let's say this collaborative form, they got $1 million grant. Let's say they have 3 years to spend that money. So there's kind of a carrot dangling for them. It also means they have to start the environmental analysis process. It also means the collaborative has to come to consensus on a preferred alternative. And I've been in those rooms behind closed doors. This isn't as easy as it seems, right? I'm sure we all know that. It also means that they have to present this project at an upcoming public meeting. They have to basically explain to key stakeholders how they arrived at the preferred alternative. And one thing I will mention, that as we transition from this need to increase pace and scale across our landscapes to a point we're at now, where I think we're actually increasing the pace and scale of resilience, folks like you are doing just that. There's going to be a larger emphasis on transparency moving forward. This time around, I don't think legislative bodies, other folks are going to allocate funds so carelessly. Not that they have carelessly in the past, but there is going to be a heightened emphasis, I believe, on transparency, where, how the funds are going to be spent. And of course, whatever work they do on this initial project, they want to make sure it can ramp up for the whole watershed, so they don't got to redo the whole system for the next project around. So how does our organization, Vibrant Planet, in particular our platform, Land Tender, help out an organization like this? Where do we even start? I'm going to go over a quick kind of workflow that'll give kind of an overview. Everything I'm going to touch on in this overview, we're going to also see again and hear again in the demonstration. So you're going to hear it twice. And at least for me, it took me hearing it a couple of times before I kind of grasped all the opportunity that Land Tender can maybe provide to folks like you. So we start in what's called the data curation process. This is where we work with a group like yourselves to identify all of the data that can be used to make an aid in decision making. As you'll see, every time we have one of these exclamation points, it means that there's input or review from the group. I really want you guys to think of Land Tender not as a new model. We're not handing you guys a model and saying, go treat here. It's not a new data set. It's the opposite. It's actually a vessel that can carry all these new data sets, all these new models that we're almost overloaded with these days. It can carry those and kind of infiltrate those into a system that you can use to make decisions. The entire time you guys are driving the bus, Land Tender is essentially the platform, the vessel that can help you arrive at a decision more quickly and more transparently. So we have all these data sets, right? And we work with you guys to identify those data gaps. If we don't have LiDAR, we can figure out a way to make it work. There's a lot of times what we find is when we meet with these groups, there's these kind of local data sets, right? There's a helipad that might not be part of a statewide data set, but it is crucial to protect that community. There could be a biological layer, a sensitive species that only a local biologist knows where the habitat, nesting, or foraging areas are. So we take all of that data and we input that into Land Tender. We then also go through what's called the landscape assessment and organization process. Now, this is a crucial step. For those of you familiar with GTR 315, for those foresters in the room, it's kind of like the HVRA system, right? We call them SARAs, Strategic Areas, Resources, and Assets. We essentially help you identify all the SARAs within the landscape. And then we actually normalize and appraise those SARAs, so Strategic Areas, Resources, and Assets. I'll explain a lot more what those are in a moment. What this allows you guys to do when using Land Tender and using these normalized SARAs is we then get to be able to appraise and compare SARAs to one another. This gives us the ability to quantify trade-offs with SARAs that have a clear economic value, like a home, with other SARAs like a water security area or a carbon sequestration zone that might have value to society, but not a clear economic value. It allows us to compare apples and oranges. Quick criteria of SARAs: they all have to be able to be mapped. You have to be able to map them. They have to have societal value, and they have to either be affected by disturbance or can affect a disturbance. So a grove of trees can be burned by a fire, or it can spread fire to another SARA nearby. That's kind of the criteria for a SARA. We then expose all of those SARAs, all of those values, all the things that you guys think are valuable in that landscape. We expose them to our unplanned disturbances. And that's typically our modeled fire. We've also done modeled drought on some other landscapes. And so as we expose those values to that unplanned disturbance, we understand risk. And now here's where we go really above and beyond just generating a risk map. We then expose those same SARAs to our planned disturbances, and these are our likely treatments. What that's going to do by exposing those to likely suggested treatments, that's going to establish what we call the restorative return on investment. The restorative return on investment is not just the avoided loss due to those unplanned disturbances, right? It's also the ecological benefit of treatment. Hey, if we treat some tree grove, it might not burn, but it also might give us more water, more biodiversity, more board feet, whatever those values may be. We then package all that up into a stewardship atlas, and we hand it off to you folks. And now right here, you're actually in Land Tender, and you're using Land Tender to create, to optimize, and compare projects, which leads to project implementation. And the best part is is that this is dynamic, right? So it's not a cloud-based, excuse me, it's not a paper-based system like Scott was describing. During an annual update, as we maybe have had unplanned disturbances, maybe we had a wildfire, maybe we did some treatments out of order, for example, we can simply update that stewardship atlas. We can update for those unplanned disturbances, and we create this kind of annual rebuild. So it's a dynamic living plan. Ooh, that was a mouthful. Thank you for bearing with me on the overflow. We're actually going to jump into land tender now. We're going to see what all this means and how it applies. So land tender is a software as service model, meaning if we have a license that covers the majority of Trinity County, we're going to have all the folks that have access to land tender, they have a license, they have a seat, and when they log on to land tender, here's what they're going to see. Right now, we see planning areas, we see scenarios, and we see comparisons. To get started, to build a new plan, remember this new collaborative that we have, this hypothetical collaborative, you can probably hear my dog coughing in the background there. As we have this new collaborative, they're going to get going on an initial plan. So we're gonna help them out. You can open up the planning area, and you can select a geography. We're going to select the Yuba geography today. And the Yuba geography, this is actually real data from the North Yuba Forest Partnership that we're going to play with. So folks out there are already using land tender to make decisions. And to start off with, what you can do is you can upload a shapefile to create a new planning area. You can actually grab this drawing tool, you can draw one, etc. For the sake of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a super scientific planning area that I've already drawn, and it is a super scientific rectangle. And so this is the planning area. This is the planning area that our collaborative, those 3 members, have decided to kick off their initial project and do some landscape assessment and planning. Few things I want to show you before we get down to creating a plan. And we're going to create a plan in a matter of minutes here. First, let's take a look at some of those SARAs, those strategic areas, resources, and assets we talked about. This is kind of the truth serum stage. Let's make sure all those things that we care about are in this landscape and they're going to be evaluated. I can turn them on, I can turn on my legend. I see we had stuff like vegetation layers that Forrester Scott made sure were uploaded. We have maybe some meadow layers that the Biology Foundation really wanted. We can turn on wildlife layers, we can turn on assets, maybe structures. And now we see all the homes, all the constituents that are calling Supervisor Tory and asking about wildfire protection. Maybe we turn on our utility infrastructure, our recreation infrastructure for that recreation-based economy. This can go on, and most landscape have identified 5, 10, 50 different SARAs, all those things again that we care about in the landscape, and we've brought them all into land tender. And again, they're your values, they're not the ones that we have picked. Next, we have actually, I'm going to skip down here to economics. So in this economics section, this is where we've taken all of those SARAs, all of those things that we've care about, and we've boiled them down and we've aggregated them and we've distributed them across 10 resilience pillars. The 10 resilience pillars were created by the Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy. We use them here in land tender because we also think there should be a common framework for resilience across all landscapes, but also it really makes your job easier when you're creating scenarios. Let me show you real quick. If I turn on, for example, biodiversity conservation pillar, we see these colors pop up. By the legend, the areas of darker yellow have higher value for biodiversity conservation. What that means is we've taken maybe 5 or 10 different SARAs and we've boiled them down and kind of stuffed them all into biodiversity conservation. Thus, when you turn on biodiversity conservation, you're actually turning on the values that enhance biodiversity conservation that you have picked out and decided. So now we know how those SARAs are going to be used in land tender. Let's look at our hazard. I'm going to turn on our modeled hazard for fire. Great time here to show you our manual. One thing we're really proud about is that we're not black boxy at all, right? You can actually figure out the exact science, all the models, all the data that went into land tender. At any time, you come over here, you can open up our manual. Looks kind of like this. Haven't loaded it yet. It takes a second. It's a Prezi manual. But when it loads, it's going to look just like land tender. And so where was I? I was in planning area. I was about to show you guys the model disturbance. So what model disturbance did we use in this landscape? Well, let's click on it. Let's click on fire. Okay, it looks like it was intensity probability. Okay, it's a This framework is based on, GTR 315, for the fire simulation. Let's see a little more. It's actually a stochastic model, and it was actually run by Logic. I know I'm whipping through this pretty quick, but the idea is that at any time you can open that manual and figure out what we did, and actually what we did basically under your direction. Back to our model hazard. With the legend, I can see all the areas that we have high fire hazard. I can actually on drought, kind of a cool thing, this landscape modeled a drought hazard as well, and how we bring it all together. I'm going to come back down to my economics, and I'm going to click cumulative. What I'm doing here is I'm turning on all of the resilience pillars, and the highest area for the highest value are indicated by dark purple. What that means is these are the areas that have most of those SARAs. Most of our values in this landscape are overlapping, if you will, in these dark purple areas. That's the value. Now, when I click risk and I turn on cumulative, we've now exposed all those values to those model hazards that we just talked about. And we've essentially now have a risk map, right? We have our values, we have our hazard, and now we have a risk map. And this is where, and this is cool, don't get me wrong, like I wish I had this 6 years ago in the Forest Service, this easily and this user friendly. But now let's actually go beyond that, right? Go way beyond it. Let's do something about this risk. And you folks are already doing a bunch, we know, for your risk. Hopefully you'll see these next couple sequences. You can do the same thing, but way, way, way quicker. Let's start scenario planning. So here's our plan, planning area, this rectangle. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on my county supervisor hat, County Supervisor Tori, who we met a moment ago. And what County Supervisor Tori is going to do is she's going to start designing scenarios for treatments on this landscape, but doing it for things that she cares about. How does she do that? She weighs objectives. We mentioned that she cares about fire adapted communities and economic diversity. So what I'm doing right now is I'm grabbing these toggles and I'm essentially telling Land Tender to create scenarios and show me the areas that we could treat on the landscape to maximize the restorative return on investment for the things that County Supervisor Tori cares about. And again, that restorative return on investment is not just the avoided loss of the things we care about due to wildfire or drought, it's also the ecological benefit to those things we care about from treatment. So this map is going to pop up in a second. We're going to see a lot of yellow on it. And what that yellow is going to indicate as it spins, and I'm stalling, what that yellow is going to indicate it's kind of a rough approximate prioritization map, if you will, of all the areas in our planning area that we could treat to enhance and maximize our restorative return on investment for fire adapted communities and economic diversity. And this is pretty cool. It shows kind of an area that based on our values and based on how we've weighed our values, where we can go treat. This may be expensive. This may take a long time to treat all of these yellow areas. Could take a long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually optimize this scenario. We're going to call this County Supervisor. It's her scenario she's building. Now we're going to optimize it, right? Let's have a real world scenario. And remember that carrot we dangled to our collaborative. We said they had what? It was 3 years to spend $1 million. So let's actually put in $1 million divided by 3. And this is totally arbitrary. And you can figure out all kinds of different ways to optimize your scenario. And again, I'm going to click optimize here. Now what's happening is we're actually calling on forces. Again, the foresters in the room might know who Alan Ager is with the U.S. Forest Service and forces. We've actually built upon that code and that adjacency function. We've pulled it into Land Tender. So right now, Land Tender is finding and designing treatments and priority areas for those treatments to maximize, again, the restorative return on investment for the things that County Supervisor Tori cares about while being constrained by this budget. This takes about 4 or 5 minutes. The first time we did this, it took like 16 hours. And all those software engineers that Scott mentioned that we're funding pretty well, they got that down to about 3 minutes. So take 3 or 4 minutes. For the sake of time, I'm going to click over. I'm going to click on the exact same project I've already built. I will click back in a second, though, just to show you that it ran in the background. This is what happens after 4 minutes. It's going to spit out 3 priority projects based upon color that actually ordered. The red one should go first, orange should go second. And these 3 priority projects are, again, the best way that we could spend that $1 million to maximize the value and the restorative return on investment for the things we care about. let's actually pull up some information. Before we do, I do want to mention this. As someone who worked for the Forest Service forever, I was getting a little tired, to be honest with you guys, about this idea of like, hey, we have some money, let's just go treat the most acres we can with the dollars we have. I really think as we move forward, we have to be more strategic, and we all know this, right? We have to be strategic about the areas. And what land tender offers folks like you the opportunity is a way to show, the powers that be, that maybe it's not about treating just as many acres as we can, but treating the priority acres. And I mention that here because I know this ground around the town of Downeyville. It's pretty steep. It's been ignored. It's expensive. How expensive is it? Well, let's click on it. We're going to pull up some information about it. So it's about $670 per acre, right? Maybe that's a reason it's been ignored until now. And if you drive through that area, you drive through Downeyville and you look up on those canyon walls, you're going to know pretty quick why land tender selected that as a priority of that $1 million to spend. So really what we're doing and what we can use land tender for is to aid us as we move that conversation away from let's just treat as many acres as we can to let's treat the priority acres. Just now, I pulled up some information about that Downeyville project, and I see a bunch of things here. I see the total acres. I see the gross treatment costs. Looks like there's some value in the timber there, so there's going to be a different net cost. I look at that net cost comes out right about $333,000. I can see here I have maximized my budget. I see a land ownership. I see likely treatments. And I also see, and we'll explain a little bit more about this, but land tender is actually tracking the co-benefits of treatment. Even though we emphasized a couple things here, we're going to see in a moment, we actually are tracking the co-benefits. So right now, if I'm County Supervisor Torrey, I have a polygon. As I move that aside, so you can see that. I have my likely treatments. I know the ownership pattern. I'm kind of getting ready, and I'm almost ready to go here for NEPA or for CEQA. I can start my environmental analysis process. I also have, I think is cool, this estimation of gross treatment and net costs. What that means is instead of waiting for a public land management agency to do a timber cruise, establish value, right away, we can already start to call up our local folks. Hey, in the next 3 years, we're going to have 3 projects around Downeyville. It's probably going to be this much money. Do you have the capacity? And what do these local folks need to build that capacity so we can keep those dollars within our communities? So we're in a great position, right? If County Supervisor Torrey was acting alone, she's in a great spot right now, but she's not acting alone, right? She's part of a collaborative. And so let me close this. Just as she's been designing a project in this planning area, rather a scenario, I should say, other folks in the collaborative have been doing the same thing. Forestry Scott's been designing projects. His look very similar to County Supervisor Torrey's, even though he weighed forest resilience, carbon sequestration, and water security. And we also have the Biodiversity Foundation and biologist Joe. Let's see what his look like. His look a little different, right? Same amount of money, same playing area, different weighed objectives. All right, so we have 3 different projects, 3 different proponents of different ways we can skin this cat. What happens at that first meeting? Before we go there, it's going to flash back real quick. You can see in the background, this did run in the background, took about 4 minutes. This is that same county supervisor project. All right, back to our task at hand. We now have 3 different ways to skin this cat. How does land tender help folks like this kind of arrive at consensus? So I think a neat tool and a really helpful transparency tool. And this is where we kind of go above and beyond just planning. I think it's a great planning tool. It's also, as we're seeing, a great communication tool. Let's start a new comparison. Let's take those 3 scenarios that we just built. Each organization built their own scenario. Let's click generate scenario. Let's call this, I don't know, let's call it plan. There it is, we'll call it plan. This is gonna take a second. And what we're gonna see are those 3 scenarios lined up together side by side and compared to a no action alternative, a no action scenario. Basically, what happens if we do nothing? When I worked in the Forest Service, we struggled with that, right? We struggle with how to articulate doing nothing also has an impact. Yes, all of these action scenarios do have impacts. There's going to be equipment, there's going to be prescribed fire, there's going to be smoke, right? But doing nothing also has probably a worse, longer term impact. How do I know that? I can scroll down here And right here, again, I see our no action scenario, and then each organization's scenario they built within the planning area. As I scroll down, I see all of our resilience pillars lined up on this left-hand side. Again, every single value that our collaborative has established in the landscape, they're all aggregated in these pillars somewhere. I can also change the pillar effects over time. So year 5 is kind of business as usual. We've actually done some treatment in here, right? We started to implement our projects, those treatments. And so we see some actual negative effects. But as we move these pillars into 10 years, into 20 years, we've now had those unplanned disturbances that have been modeled in our landscape. And I can see a ton of negative trends to everything that we care about. There's not a person in an audience at a public meeting that is going to not see that doing nothing is almost not an option these days. And then the good news is that every single one of these scenarios has far greater numbers. Question, hey, Joe, why are there still negative numbers? Well, the reason is we only spent $1 million in this landscape. Remember, we didn't treat everything. This was an initial project. We had $1 million to spend. We did a pretty good chunk. And that's why you can start to see the trends are much, much better than doing nothing. What this also allows is the different scenarios allows, basically transparency and a streamlined communication between folks who are proponents of different scenarios, because land tender tracks the co-benefits. Even though County Supervisor Tory only cared about fire adapted communities and economic diversity, we can see how it plays out against wetland integrity, right? Hey, look at that. Her project has the same co-benefit that to wetland integrity that the forestry department does, and so on and so forth. It really allows us to quickly create different scenarios, compare them to each other, see what the buy-off and the trade-offs are. Let's say that those conversations aren't going well enough. Is there another tool that can aid in this collaboration, in this consensus? There sure is. You click this view spatial comparison button. What I can actually do is I can actually scroll down, kind of neat, and we can actually see the physical spatial overlay of all 3 of those different scenarios, right? The county supervisor, the forestry department, and the biodiversity foundation, indicated by this dark blue color. Those are all the areas of complete overlap and consensus. So maybe we can even scroll down, we can click this button down here and bring that forward as our preferred alternative. And even if we can't, I think by using that previous screen, we have a great transparent way that we can walk the public or the stakeholders through why we spent the money, where we spent the money, and what values went into that decision. And again, these are all your decisions, your values, and your priorities. It's just a transparent way to express it and to do little tweaks to the plan much more quickly. So that's pretty much it for our demo. Before we go, let's check back in with our collaborative. Let's see if Land Tender kind of helped them out with that list of tasks. So were they able to plan an initial forest resilience project and prioritize treatments? Yeah, totally, right. Were they able to do that and kind of maximize the money? They sure were. They were able to, and not only that, they were able to maximize the money on the values that the collaborative cared about most. Wasn't anybody else telling them how to spend the money. They have a great head start on environmental analysis. They were able to come to consensus on a preferred alternative. They have a great way to present this decision-making framework at an upcoming public meeting, and everything they did on this initial project can immediately scale to the rest of the watershed, and they'll be able to use Land Tender for the next project and the project after that, and so forth and so on. If I can keep my sentences here, it's a mouthful. That's it for the demonstration, but we definitely wanted to make sure we left a significant amount of time for questions, and we can jump back into Land Tender. So feel free to ask away.
Really quick, I just wanted to update one other thing. Is we also, I mean, it was very focused on a pre-fire landscape. Clearly, we're not going to be very successful if that's all we focused on. So we've also incorporated the post-fire restoration framework. So in other words, being able to plan different types of interventions, irregardless of the sterile stage of a particular section of forest, right? You still only have $1 million to operate. Do you want to, should you use that money to plant and restore a particular part of a fire, or should you use that to thin out some fuels? Putting that all on the table in one decision framework, pretty critical. And then just really quickly, just to kind of show you where we're headed with things, what you saw was version 1.0. We're currently in design of 2.0. We've already gotten a lot of good feedback from individuals that have used Land Tender and said this is what we would like to see. So that's coming out in the next few months. If Trinity County is interested in deploying Land Tender, you will get the 2.0 version, which is no, 1.0 is nothing to sniff at, but this is a whole different ball of wax that's improving things. Another piece that will be coming out shortly after release 2.0 is this strike a match component, where fire marshals in particular are really interested in understanding mechanistically, hey, how does that plan stop the fire that keeps me up at night, that starts on I-5 or whatever. In this case, you're able to compare what that plan does to a particular fire scenario where you're able to adjust the weather. We're also dipping our toe into helping to start automating the environmental documentation side of things, kind of the TurboTax sort of thing for environmental documentation. We're starting with the CalVTP process, getting to a decision document, still have to do surveys. But if we can nip that timelines down a bunch too, we're happy to do it. Now we have some information that can help with that as you move through the planning process in Land Tender. And then finally is that this information can be scaled up. And although it's packaged differently, in this case, it's packaged in sub-fire sheds and fire sheds, according to the 10-year plan of the National Forest Service. But you can see is that it's although packaged differently, we're able to monitor appropriately what is happening on the ground. You're tying any investments, public dollar investments, to those actions on the ground and understanding the trends. Is that investment working? Are we losing less? Are we taking care of the ecology more? All the way to potentially Sierra Nevada Conservancy is really interested in how they can tie this to their grant making. So it's a very clear delineation on what the goals of the grants are and how that can apply to the goals of what's going on in the ground. So a lot there. So it looks like we got about 20 minutes for questions, and I'm sure that won't be enough, which we're happy to make ourselves available offline if we need to go further.
Okay, so, all right, guys, what kind of questions do you have? All right, well, I'm going to start with a couple just to get the conversation rolling. So I'm interested, once you develop a plan, just from the small scale to the big scale, I mean, what kind of buy-in do you have from the federal government that they would actually use this, since most of Trinity County is Forest Service and they have not been very receptive to things like other people doing, you know, initial NEPA kind of information gathering for them. So there's like, what's the large scale buy-in? And then how does it fit from the community input standpoint? You know, we spent a lot of time doing community wildfire protection plan and people saying, I want you to do some specific project. I mean, what happens if the community disagrees with your overall planning? You know, how do you incorporate the CWPP, which we have to reference when we do a lot of the grant applications? So kind of how do those two small scale and large scale things interact with the plan?
Well, let me start, and then Joe, I'm sure, can add some color. Is, you know, we recognize that there's a lot of information out there, and what this is really trying to do is be an and to that information and collate it. We've incorporated lots of information from previous CWPPs. In fact, that's what we're doing on the basin, where they were up for a CWPP refresh. So we didn't start over. We took all that information. We took pods analysis, dissected the landscape so it matched with that CWPP process, and now it made that CWPP a dynamic kind of ordeal. So you know, think of us an and, but still, no matter what comes out of Land Tender is decision support. It is not decision, and in many ways, it's not meant to replace all the other factors, the social factors. The you know, is a community ripe and ready for certain types of treatments versus another one? All those things have to be taken into consideration. And Land Tender isn't expected to solve those problems, but it is giving that decision maker more information to either support or understand why or why not they are going in areas, and maybe where they go next, or where they want to focus their interest and social interactions more in the future. So I want to be clear that we aren't here to solve the world. We're here to facilitate discussions and solutions with kind of putting everything on the same plate in an accessible place that anybody can access.
And-
regarding on the ground work, although we are being specific enough to be useful on the ground, we're also not trying to be prescriptive and take the place of what a civiculturist might delineate or prescribe on the ground. With that said, we invest a lot of our efforts working with the Forest Service civiculturists on the ground to make sure their needs are being met. So there's a little bit of handholding there that's really critical for the success of the Forest Service incorporating something like this. But in some ways, like, I mean, I can't speak for each Forest Service forest and district, they operate differently. But in this day and age, we just can't be operating in silos anymore. We can't be making these decisions on a land and hoping that if everybody does their own thing, that there's some strategy in there and it's all going to come together and save our communities. And so on some respect, there's got to be an understanding that we have to do this together. And this is really the tool to help facilitate that conversation. And Nick, it sounds like you're probably chomping at the bit with that question as well. And then Joe, maybe follow up after what Nick has to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, Carol, in direct response to that for the Forest Service, at least like locally, I think we have at least their strong interest in this tool. And I hope to and expect to be able to actually get their buy-in with real dollars behind it for wanting to use this as a primary sort of collaborative planning tool, a way to bridge sort of all the conversations and field tours and sort of work we do to kind of build agreement around projects and the actual like geospatial analysis and trade-off analysis and prioritization that can support all that kind of dialogue and stakeholder engagement. So I know that both, Kristen with Mad River Ranger District, sorry she couldn't be here today. I think we actually have to have another like demo for the Forest Service leadership where enough of them can participate to sort of get them to buy in. But I'm pretty sure we've got good at least buying signals. The Shasta Trinity signed on to basically a letter of support for our proposal for the Upper Trinity watershed prioritization planning. So I think we've got both forests very interested, at least, in using this as like a primary platform for collaborative planning and prioritization.
Yeah, very, very cool. We'll tell you what, I think let's keep the conversation going. I think Jerry has a hand up as well.
Oh, thanks. Really a slick presentation, nice software. I really appreciated Scott's comments about this working in silos and hoping sometime down the road people will connect in some agreement. But the nuts and bolts question is, how much does it cost? How much initial outlay, licenses in the future, annual fees? Do you get advisors with the package to help you work through the software? Just give us a sense of that.
So we did produce a proposal, which Nick has for both the Trinity Upper Watershed. We also produced a proposal for Trinity RCD, and I'll let those folks release that. Generally speaking, we price things to be on par with what it would take for a consultant to come in and do this work, with the additive benefit of us being able to support that over time. And so we kind of divide it up in two ways: a consulting side, and that's really dependent on how complex an area is, how mature the collaborative is, how good the data is. And then there's the licensing side, which is on an annual license. And like I said, I think the proposals are probably best to speak for themselves. But in terms of the hand-holding side of things, it is not a here's the software and here's the instruction manual, you're on your own. We build in a lot of support. One, because we have an invested interest for our landscapes to be more resilient, but also, it's important for, even though software is pretty user-friendly, that we want to make sure that everybody's, understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then in that process, we're also learning too. So we're getting feedback, able to improve the software for subsequent versions. But I'll leave it up to Nick and the RCD, whether you want to make those proposals publicly available. I'm not probably in the power to speak to that.
Thank you. And Nick and RCD, would you?
Yes, so I think that, Amelia and I talked about this on Friday because we got a a sort of standalone proposal for the Upper Trinity River watershed, and then Amelia had approached you guys for a countywide quote. And I think I've still got a couple of questions about what represents the sort of blended sort of costs. And so I'll hold to sort of divulge that to the whole group till we're sort of confident in what that is. But basically the proposal that they've, put together for us is a 5-year license, is basically a 5-year with the consulting support and with 30 user licenses. So basically like technical user licenses that we could place at the various organizations and agencies that would have, the sort of advanced GIS users who could pilot the thing. But then there's a whole front end that anyone, any stakeholder can basically access and look at and sort of pour over. So anyway, I'll hold on the actual kind of dollar amount just because I have.
Yeah, and this was a weird one because there was significant overlap, and so we weren't quite sure how certain one was versus the other, but clearly there would be some savings from both landscapes.
Yeah, I guess I think, the sort of like simplest answer without diving into numbers is if we're successful with that Upper Trinity watershed grant to fund a large plug of the Trinity County wide sort of cost, then we will definitely be able to find a way to fund the whole thing. Okay, I'm confident with the sort of stakeholders, with the agency interest, and if we're able to secure that sort of one large plug of grant money, we should be able to make this happen.
That's good enough. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, and I think just the other thing, like from a cost standpoint, I think as Scott or Joe said, it's basically competitive with, what would be like a high-end GIS sort of support and analysis kind of contract over a similar time frame, with, I think, a lot more usability with the 30 user licenses and the sort of coaching and support for us to actually kind of take ownership and be able to pilot a lot of it from our own seats in the county.
And just to add to that, that is I think Nick said it very eloquently there, that idea of kind of taking ownership, right? So to kind of circle back to that question of like, well, what if we arrive at a scenario and the Forest Service doesn't want to use it, or whoever doesn't want to use it, right? Just to echo what Scott said and kind of tie those two ideas together of ownership, one of the ideas behind land tender, one of the reasons why I like it so much, and I mentioned this in the presentation, that it's a great planning tool, but it's a great communication tool, is that by creating that scenario, if there is a situation like that, I think there's more, for lack of a better term, ammunition, right? There's more backing to and more transparency to how we created that scenario. So in the past, when I worked for the Forest Service, it would be two folks arguing over a scenario and no one really understood how they arrived at it. And you may have a political decision being made and a scientific decision being made, but through land tender, through that transparency and how you kind of walk through how the values were established, all the way into the prioritization of the plan itself, and knowing that all the science that's baked into it, I really think that transparency will aid in those tough decisions that we know are going to be made down the road. And that's why we call it a decision support tool. I think it democratizes the ability to arrive at a scenario and extends that ability to a lot more folks than a select few. And thus that'll actually, we think it'll add to a better, more complete project in the end. That's our hope. Again, decision support tool. But I hear you loud and clear. I work for the Forest Service forever. Know that there's also a lot of folks in those agencies and other agencies that are doing just that are trying to get more people in the fold. They need the help. So keep going and keep trying there.
Yeah, I mean, I apologize for being kind of skeptical, but the Trinity County Collaborative came up with the pilot project as far as something we wanted to do many, many, many years ago. And it's just finally working out of NEPA now. I mean, and it started in what, 2014 or 15?
So this is kind of leads to a question that I have. So my name is Pat Frost, and I've been involved in the Fire Safe Council and Collaborative for a while. And I really liked, those, I guess you call them the 10 pillars, the fire resiliency and biodiversity and water security, that sort of thing. But when Carol mentions the pilot project, it wasn't that we couldn't come to agreement on what was the high priority, but where are the, what I'm going to call, you got the pillars that hold everything up, but where is built in the pitfalls? And by that, I mean, you know, it may look based on the pillars, this may be the greatest spot to do a project, but by golly, it's got the highest density of northern spotted owl cores, and it has 3 watersheds that have anadromous fish in them, and it has 2-to-1 slopes, and it's on DG. So where in I mean, are you able to build in the pitfalls that would tell you it's kind of the inverse of your, where do you do the project? Where don't you try to do a project?
Well, and no, it's a great question. And that's really where that ROI calculation comes into place, because when you're in there, you're measuring avoided loss, but you're also measuring the treatment effects of those interventions. And so a classic example was when we deployed this on Stanford owned lands, which, I mean, the complexity of that 8,000 acres just blew me away. But they had a massive chaparral patch right next to multi-million-dollar homes. And so obviously the treatments would have a negative impact on chaparral, but how do you then weigh the benefit of protecting those homes? And so the ROI calculation takes into account that, yes, you have a negative benefit to that particular old growth chaparral patch, but in this case, next to this particular home, the ROI was sufficient to drive prioritization to treating that. 100 yards away, it wasn't necessarily the case. So by incorporating an unbiased way of understanding both the positive and negative effects of treatments on those different SARAs, whether that's an old forest grove that would benefit from treatment or a spotted owl nest site that would not, that's part of the calculation. So it may push you away from some of those areas that are high hazard because of that. But at the same time, if it's overwhelming, if it's overwhelming amount of avoided loss, it could say, yeah, there is a loss here, but you should still go here. But the cool part is we're quantifying those negative effects. So when you're in the effects analysis, you're able to say, okay, yes, we have negative effects, but decision maker, you know, does this overwhelm those negative effects in terms of the avoided loss to the community?
But I think the question is more, what are the regulatory pitfalls? You know, when is Fish and Wildlife going to say, no, you can't do that project? It's not the risk avoidance. It's like, when is there going to be something that pops up in NEPA or CEQA that shuts the project down?
And that's the quantification side of things, which we're able to produce and measure those negative effects to start to tick that off. Like, okay, this is a high priority project, but we have, you know, negative effects to steelhead. We have negative effects to spotted owl nest. So do we want to keep going forward with this, even though there's a high ROI, there's high political risk? So maybe that shouldn't be our project, but at least it's all on the table. That you're able to have those discussions early on and saying, this is where we should go. And oh, shoot, we have 6 nest sites. It's a sensitive watershed. Now what do we do? So really bringing those conversations up front and early.
And if I understand right, you can actually sort of set habitat thresholds to actually understand whether your sort of proposed treatment on balance is crossing a threshold for owl habitat, as an example. So at an individual
linear, right? It's a linear response functions that we list that you guys, you know, biologists will have a say in determining.
You can set the parameters basically for what the thresholds are on that response function and sort of see where we're crossing out of suitable nesting and roosting habitat. And then you can actually say, well, yeah, we're losing nesting roosting habitat. We understand there's consultation and sort of NEPA compliance, ESA compliance sort of consequences to that. But as you sort of said, on balance, might it still be worth doing because of the avoided loss kind of values? And you might be able to make, I think, Carol, from that standpoint, it could help you make the case with regulatory agencies that, you know, a take in one stand, let's say, or one, you know, nesting site actually helps to protect, you know, across a landscape, several others, as one way to sort of think of like, what does this help us do from a effects and trade-off analysis standpoint?
Okay, thanks. So what other questions?
I think I saw Jerry's hand go up again.
Nick, I think you kind of implied there was some preliminary buy-in from Six Rivers and the Shasta Forest. What about other agencies like Fish and Wildlife and Fish People? Have any preliminary talks happened there?
Not on my part.
No?
No.
So that kind of just reflects what Carol was saying, about other agencies just raising their hand and really hindering things, but.
I mean, that's one thing that we'd be willing to do an experiment with though too, right? And the idea that it'll be up to you guys whom you distribute the licenses to, right? If we have, I think we mentioned 30 licenses in the proposal, in theory, if you have a true kind of collaborative environment, maybe we extend a license to one of those agencies, and we, someone like myself can get in there and show them a demonstration and how to create scenarios as well. And so I think that's kind of the idea behind this as a decision support tool, instead of, keeping folks in the dark that may, towards the back end of the project, either through litigation or through some sort of regulatory move, kind of shut a project down, when they're included on the front end. And they're included on the front end in a way that's easy for them and quick for them to actually create a scenario and to see that transparency. I think we're going to get buy-in without a big time sink in the front end of the project by using a system like Land Tender. So up to you guys who you want to extend those seats to, but we're here to support and help teach those folks how to use Land Tender.
Well, maybe something this concrete, like the software program, will do that. But the collaborative in its whole life has been begging agencies to come to the table at the front end of any conversation. And it's just been, that has not happened.
I hear you, Jerry. I've trust me, I've pulled my hair out just the same, sir. I've been there myself. And not in anyone's defense, and nor do I know, but a lot of times it's a capacity issue, right? The idea of, especially for like, Fish and Wildlife, they have one biologist for a zone that is like, 2 states. And so they can't be involved in every collaborative process, but maybe they could with a time-saving mechanism. I don't know.
I hear you, but there's always a reason, and they're never there.
Okay, so I think Jill has a question.
I do have a question. I don't know that it's something that the creators can really answer, and maybe it's something to just start a larger conversation. When you've got a tool like this that can, with what looks like pretty amazing accuracy, project negative effects of any fire starting, what does anybody think the opportunity might lie here for some brand new conversations, not just with the Forest Service, though largely there. But when we look at what's happened to all of our insurance rates and, all of the cascade of negative effects that have come into all of our lives because we've allowed these things to happen, where does a new conversation start to take place with what are we truly willing to give up based on what we're then left with because of those decisions? Do you think something like this then becomes a tool for those kinds of considerations?
Well, Jill, I don't think you could have asked a better question, right? Because that's really where we see a lot of value. And one of the reasons why, hey, I'll be honest, I had my dream job in the Forest Service. I had a super cool job. It took me years to get. And when I left because of the 3 things, right? Land Tender is a great planning tool. It's a great communication tool because I've been in these collaboratives. And the third thing that I think really opens up a lot of opportunities is that question you just asked. And so what you can see is that by tracking the co-benefits, right? By tracking, hey, if our group works really hard to create this resilience project, what are those co-benefits to biodiversity or to carbon or to water supply? Those co-benefits, we really see in the future, those can open up different funding mechanisms, right? If you can show the trend based on your treatment, well, then why the heck aren't other folks coming to the table to help pay for that, right? So what it can really do is unlock a wider breadth of funding sources in the future. You mentioned insurance companies, that comes to mind. Who likes fresh water? Who likes clean air? And so what we see is is a lot of opportunity there so that we're not all just competing over the same, block grants, the same singular forces that arrive only at a legislative body. There are a lot of folks that benefit from a healthy, resilient forest, but only a few folks are contributing to the future health of that forest. And a tool like ours, and there's other folks working on this too, they can unlock that value and really get more people to the table.
So I see that, thank you, Scott. I see that, or sorry, Joe, Keats, SPI, you have a question? You have a question?
Yeah, Joe, if you could talk to me about your scenario. I know Downeyville, and so where did you get your data? Because it appears to me, or it occurs to me, that if you don't have good data, you can't even have a good planning tool. But the other is you have to have people who not all that forest around. And the collaborative I participate in here has people who are interested in what the forest is doing. It only has influence over the projects of the Forest Service. So where you incorporate other landowners and landowner patterns, I know how that's a part of works that each landowner puts together projects and puts them within their state council, and that upfront project evaluation and prioritization. I don't think that takes very long, but again, if you don't have control of the ownership and the projects, it's your plan. So you're in a place where you have all four streets and you have all the groups all in the same room that goes first with.
Sorry, Keith, you're really breaking up. So Joe, did you get kind of the gist of his question?
I think I might have. Let me see if I can field it. But yeah, like Keith definitely can talk more through it. So yeah, we are to a certain degree at the mercy of the folks that are willing to provide information. With that said, we've normalized the process so it doesn't defer necessarily to where there's more information and where there's not. But with that said, and we've had situations in other landscapes where SPI has been a big player, and sometimes they provide information, sometimes they haven't. But that's a critical component to it. Other information that's publicly available, we can generate across land ownerships, like where the trees are, where they're not, the fuels that inform the fire modeling. But if there's an important stand of trees or important biological asset that nobody else knows about, you're exactly right. So this is why that data curation phase up front with all the stakeholders is really critical. It's our most time consuming effort to do this data curation piece because that's really what drives the prioritization. We just put it all together in the blender and then you can, develop your objectives associated with it. But really critical component. With regards to some of the other parameterizations, that also is feedback that we generate through the process. So again, it's not, hey, Byron Planet, we want land tender. Let's sign an agreement. And then we go in a black hole and come back and give you land tender. It is an iterative process, enough so that you guys are recognizing the importance of all the input that you have and then tailoring it to meet what you feel is accurate. With that said, we've done this a lot. So we've streamlined it. We've made it as painless as possible, but I won't say it's completely pain-free because we want to get it right.
And hey, Keith, yeah, you were very broken there, sir. But I put my email in the chat too. If you want to email me that full question, I'm more than happy to provide an answer for you. And if again, I'm totally guessing here, I heard you mention the Downeyville project and then you got pretty broken. If you were asking about where did we get the treatment costs from, that was based on projects that had happened, in that same watershed. And so again, kind of like Scott was saying, kind of good data in, good data out. And that not just data, that also comes from treatment costs, et cetera, to arrive at that kind of to maximize our restorative return on investment. So everything is based on that data creation, that kind of process in the beginning that Scott mentioned. And I think a lot of folks have questions like that. Hey, where'd you get the data from? Where does this come from? And as you start that data creation process, you realize that really at the end of the day, it's your decision and you are driving the bus. We're just we built the car, but you drive it. The bus rather, I should say, huh?
Okay, so we're coming up on 2:15. So do we have anybody else who has a question that hasn't been able to jump in? So, so I do see Joe's email in the chat box. So if people do have questions and they want to maybe follow up a little, hopefully he'll be able to respond. So
Thank you very much for joining us today, Joe and Scott. It was great to have you here.
yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting. Get some serious thought provoking conversations going. Thank you.
No, thank you. And you guys, you know what, whether or not you end up using us, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Just keep pushing. We all have to in California and elsewhere. So hats off to you guys. Like I said, great reputation, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is discussions. And so Tom March wanted to bring up the Caltrans 299 project. So take it away, Tom.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. So I've been asked by Caltrans Planning. They have a road work maintenance project coming in the future, I think in the year 26, 27. And they wanted to throw in the environmental study to do fuels work within that project. So when we do projects, you know, you think of just the roadway, but there's everything that goes with it. It's culverts, bridge, roadway, ITS, everything, all the items. So we're throwing in the fire fuels maintenance work that needs to happen into this, and let me say we're trying to, and it needs to be approved. But right now we're trying to see how much it's going to be and what it's going to detail. And there's two parts to it. That would be the first part would be the environmental study, and then the second part, which would be implementation. So we're just talking about the study right now. And planning wants to know what kind of scope are we talking about? What kind of residual are we looking for within the treatment? And so if I could have the screen, let me see, host, can I share the screen?
Yes, try now.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. So are you seeing a Google map with a red line?
Yes.
Okay, so it goes from, the plan is from 64 mile. You see those numbers on the side of the road on the placards. You'll see TRI 299, you know, Trinity County 299, and there'll be numbers on it. And there'll be from 64 all the way to 70. Right there by, I forget what the road's called, like Trinity Dam Boulevard, I think, goes into Lewiston. So evacuation route, I'm thinking, and there is private lands, Sierra Pacific, BLM lands. The right of way, I'm not sure of. I mean, it changes every half mile, every quarter mile. It can be, you know, it could be anything. So I haven't really looked into that just yet, but so I'm just gathering information. What is the consensus for a fuels management project in this section of roadway? And obviously there's BLM. We'd have to do NEPA, do the study for NEPA, but BLM would probably have to be the lead on that part. So like I said, I'm looking for prescription. What is the consensus in Trinity for a roadway fire fuels reduction work? And that is, for the most part, avoiding the sensitive sites. I already know that I've heard that there is a spotted owl in this, known spotted owl in this location. Obviously, there's a waterway close by, and working with the California forest practice rules, following those steps. You know, I'm trying to keep it low-hanging fruit, because the more complicated, the more expensive per acre, and I only have so much money to work with. I want to maximize that, not only for Trinity County, but 7 other counties as well. So I'm, you know, just kicking the can around, looking for, what prescription has worked. You guys have been hit hard last couple of years. Has there been any fires that have gone through prescriptions, and did they hold up well? What worked, what didn't? So I'm looking for something to take to our planning group from Trinity County. So, and then I'll put up my email address and phone number on the chat if we want to talk elsewhere too. But just for right now, basal area, square foot per acre, a couple of things. I'll just go through examples. What kind of spacing are we looking at for trees? What kind of, on center or basal area? Would we be into the approve the idea of removing trees directly from the traveled way? And traveled way is the white line that you see there. And we've gone some areas of 30 feet. And in Susanville, we went up to 50 feet because we have high winds. We had the hog fire throughout there. We did a 30 foot through there. We had high winds with the hog fire, ripped right through that treatment. So we were able to work and do another treatment out there, and we did a 50, a little bit more aggressive, but luckily the Dixie fire didn't get to it, and it was not tested, but the community was very supportive at that time, seeing that. So, and I'll show you a picture. I have some pictures of what I'm talking about. Can you see that added picture?
No.
Or do I have to share that too? I think I have to share that too.
Field trip.
So Tom, I'm just curious. So CAL FIRE doesn't have its own prescription for like a shaded fuel break? They don't have a prescription?
Well, they do, but I'm looking for community.
Oh.
When you say CAL FIRE,
I'm sorry, Caltrans, sorry.
Caltrans, yeah. We do, but I'm just looking for community input, and because I can come up with something and then find out it doesn't work, it doesn't jive with the community. It might be too aggressive, like I'm saying. This is a 30-foot clearing from the white line to the first tree. And then we did go to a 50-foot, a little bit more aggressive with that. So you can see it's a little bit more, but we provided the gap, we've thinned the trees. And this was supported in Susanville. And Susanville and Trinity was Weaverville, a little bit different on public opinion. And I just want to make sure that something like this, if it is too much. So that's why I'm talking. Xander, look, you got your hand up.
Yeah, so do you mean that's a 30 or 50-foot removal of all kinds of vegetation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so 30 foot from the white line, doesn't, it looks like you still have some large trees, or there's zero vegetation 30 feet from the white line?
Zero from the white line to the first tree. Brush and trees. Yes, there's grass. And hopefully we can, our plan is to manipulate the vegetation for perennial grass and remove prevent the annuals.
So are you saying you would mow it or spray it?
Well, we're going to plan to spray out in Susanville in this section to prevent the regrowth. I'm not going to push that one in Trinity at this time. I need to get something done, and I want to try to make something that we can agree upon. So that's not on the plate right now. So I'm looking, what can we do out in Trinity County in that section?
So this is Pat. It seems to me, I mean, it's hard to kind of give you, this is what we ought to do when maybe we ought to go look at it. Because just looking at an aerial, it's kind of hard to say what are we really dealing with.
He solved that for you.
Well, that's that spot.
Well, I'm asking what has worked with Trinity County county roads on
the only example I can give would be Highway 3 going north out of Weaverville was the Browns shaded fuel break along Highway 3. And that goes from just from the S curves, if that makes sense to you, Musser Hill, all the way up to Rush Creek Road. And that was done in probably 2004, maybe 2005 with RAC money. And the prescription there was anything less than 6 inches was taken out. Nothing greater than 6 inches was taken out. But that would be something to look at and see if that makes sense to you guys. I mean, that has not had a lot of regrowth in it. It's still probably 100% crown closure in most areas. It'd be something to look at. I think one of the other bigger differences on this stretch of 299, if I'm not mistaken, probably most of it is decomposed granite, which makes it a little more susceptible to erosion the more intrusive you are in your prescription.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there's also potentially some cannabis grows in that area that may have to have screening. There's
They're using the vegetation as their screening now.
Yeah, there's several that are east that are going from Trinity Dam up toward Buckhorn Station. There's some big grows there, and so I'm not sure.
That's a constant aesthetic value. Screening, I get that a lot, but we had that a lot on Shingletown 44, and but I know
they're required to have screening, and so that may be a condition of their license that they have vegetative screening versus a fence, and so
sure. And
not an aesthetic thing.
My opinion is roadway safety, corridor fire safety, and a screen should be on the property side. But we try to work with the public and leave some vegetation on the 4 foot, 6 foot.
There's one.
So how wide is your right of way past the white line right now?
So like I said, the right of way boundaries vary. And if it is our state right of way, sometimes it's 50 feet. If we're in the federal easement, it can be 100 feet from the center line. It just all depends. So at this point, I'm just generalizing what can be done. And so there's not, we don't have, that comes all in the planning. The maps will come out, we'll find out ownerships, and even though we have ownership of land, sometimes we don't have ownership of trees. And that could be the private owners, federal owners. So it all comes out in the future in the planning. So I've just been asked, what can we do right now? Send our planning department in the right direction.
Well, okay, so I want to move this along because we've missed our project updates, but I want to summarize a little bit here. So let's think about what have we asked on other projects? What are our BLM standards? What are our Forest Service standards? So they're looking to try and treat 300, 400, 500 feet off the road. So let's start with our maximum. Let's say we want to go 500 feet and then find out what gets cut out after that, right? So let's shoot for our goal and go from there. We know that the Trinity County Collaborative has their pilot project, but they also have their white paper with their accepted prescription. So let's get that to Tom and let's let him chew on that. Let's get Tom the Grass Valley Creek watershed or fire management plan. Let's let him look to see if there's anything in there that can help him direct this. So let's get him some of these resources. Tom, there's the BLM has their new the statewide programmatic to expand their right-of-way treatments, which can be very easily put together, and it's a faster process than a full NEPA. So if there's ways to work with that on the BLM side too. They just did that on Little Browns Creek. They're doing it in the Weaverville Community Forest on Mill Street and other areas right now. So I'll try to get you some of this information to help develop this, and then we'll bring this back again next month. Is that appropriate?
Would that help you, Tom?
Yeah, exactly. Something I can chew on that's been worked in the past and that I can give to planning, and we can work with that. That would be perfect. I appreciate that. I've just put my email address and my phone number up. So if anybody else wants to chat on the side, open to that also.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing this to the Fire Safe Council, and thanks for thinking of fuel reduction in your 299 project. I think that's a great idea. We really appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, so let's move on. So we have a discussion on the Forest Service 10-year strategy.
All right, so I'm not going to take up too much time here. I think we all know that there's a 10-year strategy. It's all available for us to check it out. The biggest thing that we should all be paying attention to do is that there is a zone of their fire prior or the high risk fire, this little guy right here, that reaches into the Shasta Trinity National Forest and into Trinity County. So this is a very arbitrary shape file that I've asked Shasta Trinity National Forest. They don't even have the shape file for this area, which is going to be prioritized for treatment moving forward. So once they get it, they'll be able to share it with everybody else. But that does mean that there's going to be some funding behind it to treat within that area. So just be aware that that's coming down.
So just generally, where in Trinity County is that?
South of 299, right?
Do we have a?
Yeah, I mean, it crosses 299. It covers the Weaver Basin, Junction City, and a bunch of the 299 corridor.
Okay.
And that's Hayfork, that little blob to the bottom left, the southwest corner. That's Hayfork. So
okay.
Yeah, that gives you a sense.
Okay, and neither of the other two fire sheds, the one to the northeast or northwest, are not in Trinity County?
The corner of that one to the west might come to, I mean, it comes to the very edge, at least, of kind of Burnt Ranch, Salyer. It takes in Willow Creek, I think.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep.
Nothing on the north part of the county? That's weird.
No, you can see that one that is there basically hits the Trinity divide, but doesn't come into the county.
Nick, do you know where they came up with these? I mean, how they came up with them?
Yeah, I mean, they give a really detailed accounting in that 10-year plan, and there's reference, but basically the Forest Service has this whole sort of fire transference sort of model about where fires are most probably going to originate on National Forest System lands and move on to private lands, and where there are the most assets at risk on private lands from fires that originate on National Forest System lands. So it's basically built off of that methodology. And so, yeah, that's the gist of it, I guess.
So something like the river complex that came down out of the Alps, we didn't make the cut just because there's so few assets at risk in the North County. Is that it?
Most likely. Yeah. And that there's such a small amount of private land there that it's mostly moving on to other National Forest System land. Not to discount Sierra Pacific or all the other private land up there, but just in the context of, this west-wide analysis, there are a bunch of places where there's more private land with more assets at risk.
And when I read this, I mean, there is the opportunity to kind of add more or revise these. Is that correct?
I think that's fairly unclear. I think the idea that is in the out years of this sort of 5-year intent, the 5-year infrastructure money and the 10-year sort of plan, that you're moving beyond these landscapes, but at least the first 2 years of funding that's coming from infrastructure money, as an example, is meant to hit just in these priority fire sheds.
Right. Okay. Any other questions about the, I would suggest everybody read that, but anybody have any questions right now about the 10-year strategy?
And if you want to find it, if you haven't read it already, it was in the last 2 newsletters, the emails. So you'll be able to find it there.
Amelia, I'll send you a separate note. I think we might have access to the actual shape files for those priority fire sheds from some other sort of channel. So okay. I'll see if we can get those to you sooner than later.
Okay, so we'll move on to grants. So we have a potential letter of support for the RCD to apply for funds from PG&E for the cleanup after the storms downriver. So Amelia?
That's Chris.
Chris, go for it.
So yeah, so what we're looking at is a similar type of project actually that we had done the year before last, and we've been pretty successful in getting funding from PG&E in the past. And we had actually in 2020 targeted Suzy Q Road as well as Trinity Village, and then the recent storm kind of knocked out some of the prior work that we had done. And so we're asking for around $100,000, and that's kind of the max ask from PG&E, and they disperse based on what they want. So generally you don't get the full ask, but to do more of the storm cleanup work and then roadside fuels reduction and chipping. So pretty standard work that the RCD has been a part of. And we would want to do that kind of, we have a pretty big footprint. So it would be some stuff off of Campbell Ridge Road, the Trinity Village, South Fork Road, and then I guess Suzy Q and just kind of the greater Hawkins Bar area. So that's what we're kind of looking for support for, to get a letter, and then we'll have the grant mostly finished, just need a letter to kind of top it off.
Okay, so the draft letter was in the newsletter. Anybody have any questions about it or concerns?
I have a question. This is Dina Magdaleno. Do you recommend that the same be done in Humboldt County for the people in the Willow Creek area, that if you're writing, because I was looking at that grant and trying to figure out how to go about it, and that you're doing this is wonderful. I'm really glad. But should Humboldt County be looking at doing the mirroring what you're doing in the Willow Creek area?
Yeah, so this, yeah, I'm sure you read from the detail. It's kind of geared towards like fire safe councils. It's where the funding
Yeah,
supposed to go
yeah.
to. And so I had sent some of the information over, I think, to the Willow Creek Fire Safe Council, and I would highly recommend that they also apply for that funding.
Right. I would be glad to have our tribe look at sending a letter of support for the project as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
So Chris, do you want to put your email address in the chat so Dina knows how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I will do that right now.
Okay, and thank you, Dina. Any other comments, questions about this draft letter of support?
I think we do it.
Okay, if there's no concerns, objections, hearing none, I think we will go ahead and send that letter of support. Okay, and then for those of you who joined us later, we took the grants 5B off the agenda. So we're going to move on to project updates. So let's see, Tom, are you still here? Do you have any updates for Caltrans?
I don't have any updates. We're starting, actually, yes, next month, March, our tree crews are going to start removing hazard trees in the southern portion of Trinity, knocking them down, making them safe, working with Forest Service on those for approvals. Cut, leave on site. If it's a hazard, it would be moved to a manageable, safe location for public access for fire. But that's, and then any fuels work is dependent on inmates or CAL FIRE inmate crews, and they're down to a minimum. So I really doubt that that's going to be available. And then we have all of our routine mowing and mechanical that can be done. So that's about it.
Is that along Highway 36 when you say the south part of the county?
South Colorado County 3.
Okay.
The 3 rules and 3, and I think 36. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any questions for Tom? Thank you. Let's see. I think next. So Basho, do you have an update on what the Lower Trinity Prescribed Burn Association is doing?
Yeah, we are moving forward with renting office space in downtown Willow Creek. We received a $35,000 administrative capacity building grant from Humboldt Area Foundation a couple weeks back that we are starting to implement on the ground and ameliorate our office capacity in every sense of the word. So that's very exciting. I'm actually in the space that we'll probably be renting right now, which is, it's great. It's downtown Willow Creek, and we're going to have a central presence with a lot of good workspace for everybody. In addition to that, we're looking forward to our membership drive on March 13th. We're going to have a potluck at a board of directors household on Sunday, March 13th, following a Saturday Chainsaw Club meeting that we are also facilitating. I think that's all of the events. Oh, no, on March 7th, we are co-sponsoring with DreamQuest, a Zone Haven software, evacuation software orientation for the public and for interested agencies and stakeholders / entities. Ryan Derby from Humboldt OES is coming out here to perform that orientation, and it essentially starts the conversation for CERT for us, Community Emergency Response Team development in the greater Willow Creek area. This is a FEMA sponsored program that has an umbrella, organizations in the county and statewide that attempts to mitigate disaster response and empower a civilian-based team to be, on site, on call, not 40 miles away in either directions, when these disasters hit our river communities. So that's an exciting workshop that we're looking forward to. The CERT training will happen in June, but initially the zone haven orientation will start that conversation. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Basho. And that brings up the point that the Fire Safe Council, so Zone Haven has kind of been skirting the Fire Safe Council in quieter conversations. And so Zone Haven is a emergency response and a zone evacuation portal that many of the counties adjacent to us and neighboring us are using, but it's currently out of the budget for Trinity County is the answer that I get. And so I guess what I would like to see is get approval to apply for funding to utilize this system so that it can be used cohesively across boundaries. Willow Creek Fire Safe Council asked about it this week. Ed and I have had conversations about it. Denise has worked on it in other counties. She's had discussions with bringing it to Trinity County with the sheriff's office and all that kind of stuff. Our own county representatives will say that Code Red is clunky and that there's issues with it and that the zones aren't great. So I think it's still on the table for discussion and developing that capacity. I would expect a date where all of California uses Zone Haven, and it gets closer and closer every month. It seems like another county adopts it. So it seems right now that we're getting left behind, that the Zone Haven is a very easy to use system for the public, and that it's hard, especially on our boundaries right now, to show some of those communities that are further out from Weaverville what's going on and keep them updated when that's not accessible. So I think that we just continue to bring this back up and have more conversations about the opportunities.
So you're saying that Zone Haven and Code Red are two different things, and that Code Red's clunky and Zone Haven is what everybody else is using, but you're getting some pushback somewhere. Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that we would love to have some Trinity County representation at the Zone Haven orientation on March 7th. It will be at DreamQuest downtown Willow Creek from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock in person. I will also be posting a Zoom link for remote participation. Again, we really would love to see y'all here for that, just as a furthering of the conversation.
Have you reached out to Jeremy on that to see if he'll be there for you?
I have not.
Yeah,
that might be a good idea, because if I were to appear at that, it would appear I was stepping on his district toes.
I see. Okay, I will let him know. Thank you for pointing that out. I sometimes forget that he's our district soup over there. Thanks.
Denise, did you want to add to the conversation? I saw your head pop up.
Yeah, I've just been listening along. I mean, I've had a lot of talks to different partners about Zone Haven and got to see it in action when we had the fires going on in Shasta County this year. And I have some people that are willing to talk to us if the group is interested at some point in the future. I have somebody from Shasta County in the IT department and Siskiyou County as well. I don't have much else to add to that.
So to your knowledge, Denise, Shasta, Siskiyou, and Humboldt use this. I don't remember if Tehama has adopted or not.
They're either using it or they're in the process of adopting it or working out a system. For using it.
So what if you were to agendize and Denise could get a representative to talk about it, and we asked Sheriff Saxon maybe to join us that day?
And Ed?
So next month, we're supposed to be receiving a presentation from Trinity County sheriffs on their new zones, which Denise, so the zones are a whole thing. But anyway, the zones were redone last year during the Carr fire. I can't get, or not the Carr fire, sorry, thank you. The Monument fire,
River complex.
So they were redone, but outside of the sheriff's department, they haven't been seen. And so we're bringing them here to be discussed. They'll be at the chief's meeting this month. Denise has been doing a lot of work to clean them up, get it to a good point. The question I still have and haven't got an answer, are those the final ones? Like, is that it? Is that what we're using? Or is there like room to provide feedback to finalize these, and who finalizes these? And so I haven't been given clear direction on either of those things, but hopefully we'll get the presentations, we'll see what the zones are, and see what the opportunity for feedback is, because even there's different structures and ways to utilize and activate zones. And so depending on how big the zones are, what's the structure, are they gonna then split zones, all of that kind of stuff. So yes, we should have that on our agenda for next month.
So you know who else you should probably pull in on this is, I can't pull it up on my phone because it's all, I could do it now. But Susie Cockums is putting together, you have seen this, it's called a CAO, the Inter-County Collaborative Emergency. It's brand new. And it just seems like that's fuel to say, if the counties that we're collaborating with are using this, we should be on that same page. It would be very awkward to be using something that was different in a time when we're trying to work together.
Yeah, it is quite a bit more expensive, and that's where the issue right now sits. So, okay, fair.
Right.
I think on that note too, if I could just interject, is that, when we're working across county boundaries, that's a really good point, Jill, is that, if we're using different management systems, that it might be harder to communicate across boundary lines. So that is one benefit of having a system that is widely adopted.
Okay, so we'll talk about evacuation zones and planning next month. Okay, so I think next on project updates would be Keith Greenwood from SPI. Keith, do you have anything to let us know what you're doing? You still there? You still there?
Yeah, I'll try to help my microphone a little better. Maybe if I can get closer, it might help. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, better is closer. Closer is better, sorry.
Oh, closer is better. Okay, I guess there's been a lot of talk about planning and planning tools, and I don't want to minimize those too much, but I would say that, and I think Nick, maybe you support this, that getting through the process of project approval and the process of getting things implemented is a major sticking point. I think Pat pointed that out as well, was, we could say, hey, we want this project and everybody wants to do it, or most everybody wants to do it, and then you got to go through your NEPA process, and it may or may not work. So I guess my focus has been much more on coordination, so that our projects coordinate and complement our neighbors. So we've been doing a little bit of fuel break construction, and I think going along with Tom's theme with regard to Caltrans, you're going to achieve different objectives with the different style of prescription and the width. You may just modify the ground fuels. You may just modify the ladder fuels. You may choose to modify the canopy fuels too. And based upon the width, you may just be able to stop a fire that starts just from the road. So all that to say that we're doing some fuel break construction on some strategic spots for us to protect our neighbors and to protect ourselves from our neighbors. And so in a lot of places we're treating the ground fuels, some places we're treating ground and ladder fuels, and some places canopy as well. So we're trying to complete some of the projects we started before. And I think we're taking advantage of the dry winter, because summer's not going to be a good time to be trying to get much done, especially mechanically. So that's what we're working on right now. And so if you hear some equipment up on a ridgetop somewhere, it might be us.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Keith? Okay, that worked a lot better, closer to the microphone. All right, so let's see. I'm probably next with Trinity Center Volunteer Fire Department. I just wanted to bring you, maybe talk about an issue that just came before us this week, which was a homeowners association asked us about AB 38, which is the mandatory CAL FIRE defensible space inspections if you're going to sell your property. And so this homeowners association is doing some long range planning, and they're trying to accommodate homeowners who may want to sell their property. And I'm just not sure, that was the first time we were aware of it. And we're just not sure how many other entities are getting questions from people about this AB 38. Anybody else getting this kind of like, how do I get CAL FIRE up here to do my defensible space inspection so I can close on the sale of my property?
Well, they ask me all the time if I do them, and I say no. The
You say no?
realtors call me, like I get it all the time.
Okay. So, all right. Anyway, it was a new to me issue. We're not doing them. We're telling people, go ahead. CAL FIRE has a nice form you can fill out on their website where you can request the CAL FIRE inspector to come up. If you don't have the defensible space that you need, you can sign an agreement between the buyer and seller where the buyer agrees to get the work done within a year. So could be a lot of defensible space work around houses, just to sell your house. Who knew? Okay. So
I have something to say. This is Dina Magdalena. Here in our area, people are losing their insurance because of the fires that we've been having. And one of the things that's happening is the CAL FIRE standards are one of the things that insurance companies are using to cancel people's insurance. And they're difficult for, as you were saying, for individual property owners to be able to put those 10, 30, and 100-foot defensible spaces out there, especially after we had this forest fire and this snow event. So, and, like I spoke to someone just this week, and his insurance agent came out during the storm and couldn't even get here. So his insurance was canceled. And so those standards are going to become very important, I think.
Well, Dina, so I thought you could not cancel insurance within a certain distance of a wildfire, for like 1 year after the fire. Isn't that a state law?
I think that, or a disaster, yes.
Yeah, a declared disaster area?
Yeah.
I will tell him that. That would be great, because then he'll have time to look around for another insurance provider.
Yeah, because they
Okay,
had
thank
a bunch of people whose insurance got canceled after some of the earlier the Kincaid fire. And so I understand that it was a state law. You may have to be a declared disaster area. It may not help if it's just a little fire, but just a little fire. But anyway, that would be something to check into.
Well, he was between the Monument and Knob fires, so it's pretty much of a disaster.
Yeah.
So I'll let him know.
The California insurance, what is it?
Ricardo Lara.
Yeah.
He came out with that this last year, that he was forcing them to hold on to people for a year.
What is the full name of that group though? California Insurance
Well, he's the insurance commissioner.
Commissioner. Yeah, so look at the California Insurance Commissioner's website and it will have it there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good luck. Yeah, that's going to be an issue. Okay, so Jerry or Pat, any updates from the collaborative?
Oh, wait, you skipped Joe.
Oh, I don't have an update.
Joe.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're fine.
The collaborative hasn't met since the last Fire Safe Council meeting. Our next meeting is March 18th.
Okay. Okay, Trinity County RCD, Chris or Dave? or Amelia?
Always skip me. Okay, so quick Fire Safe Council update. So we have the calendars going out. The calendar in February made it in the paper. We'll have the calendar in March also go into the paper, and that suggested things for improvements. And I forget what this next month is. Maybe it's home hardening. So that's awesome. We are working to bring back the local area advisors and working on vamping up a neighborhood ambassador program. I'll bring that next month and present on it and get some feedback on that. And I'm trying to think of the 100 other things that I do on a regular basis. Lots of coordinating meetings with other fire safe councils and that kind of stuff. Still working to try to get more money into South or Downriver. Humboldt Area Foundation hasn't responded to that request. There is a new initiative forming for response after fires, and we can bring that about maybe at the next Fire Safe Council meeting, because we'll probably be asking for a letter of support to a grant. So that's a good time to talk about that. Their emergency forest response teams. And so that's to take it from salvage to replanting. So this is mostly for forested properties, not for regular homeowners. And I'll pass to Chris.
Chris, what's going on?
So since the last meeting, we've brought on one other forest health crew. So we now have 2 crews running. Our additional 2 crews will start next Tuesday, March 1st. So that'll be exciting, having 4 crews running. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then so lately we've been working mostly within the Weaver Basin, and we've cut around 40 acres in preparation for broadcast burning on Forest Service land. And then we've also assisted the Forest Service in some of their burns, providing burn personnel as well as holding for around 56 acres that were burned on Forest Service. We're currently out working in the Rush Creek area on BLM land. And then the last week, we've also been pretty active with our community chipping program in the Hawkins Bar area. And so that's been a fair amount of chipping. And I think we're about finished up, at least for this, and I'm sure more will accumulate, and we'll try to head back out there, and I think sometime in May for the more county-wide chipping effort. So
I have one other plug that I forgot to discuss at our last meeting. So the Trinity County Fire Safe Council is updating their data portal right now. So we're asking for all completed projects in the last 2 years. So any kind of treatments to be submitted to Denise, and planning projects. So your shape files for where you're planning a project, and then your treated project areas from the last 2 years, so 2020 and 2021. We're using this as an annual report to CAL FIRE to show them what we're doing in our CWPP footprint. So we really need buy-in and support from everybody. So please work with Denise to get her that data so that we can continue to show CAL FIRE that we are working on our CWPP. And show ourselves where it's going to be an internal audit that has a formal report to show what percentage of the CWPP identified areas were treated. So we'll be able to share that with everyone.
Okay, so that's it for the RCD. Anything else? So I just have one question. The calendar that was in the paper for February said February 22nd in the corner, up in the right-hand corner. And I got a couple questions from people wondering what was going on the 22nd.
I mean, February 2022, is that what it meant?
It's probably meant February 2022.
Yeah.
But I got the same people asking me, like, is it February 22nd? What's
going
happening on today?
No.
Okay.
So
So
maybe
we
it
need a
needs to
little
be-
February
asterisk,
2022.
a little asterisk, or what do you call it, apostrophe in front of the 22 or something, but
HIP abbreviations don't make the cut copy.
Okay, Watershed Center, Dylan or Xander?
I don't have much today. I mean, I'll let Xander maybe update on Bowerman Ridge project updates, but as far as we haven't done much, the crews have been laid off and we're getting ready to go here starting in March. So we'll be bringing on 2 saw crews to start doing project work and bringing on our forestry crews, wildlife crews, and botany crews here shortly to start working with the Forest Service. So all of this is going to happen in the next month, and I'll keep it short if that's all right with everyone.
Xander?
Yeah, not much to report on Bowerman. I think with the snow, it's been tough even just to get access to the site to do anything on the ground. We're pretty much in the specialist report building phase now. Archaeology is kind of starting to design their survey protocols and strategy, as well as the hydrology and wildlife folks are working on specific protection measures for that. So hopefully once the snow clears, we can actually start doing surveys on the ground and keep that moving forward. But that's pretty much what I have for that.
Okay, I would still like to really, I'll figure out a time to come over to Hayfork and sit down because there's some confusion over which parts are in the Bowerman fuel break project versus the Trinity camps versus other stuff going over there. So I would think it would be helpful to sit down and just point at some maps.
This is a great time to plug. If you give Denise your shape files, it will all be in the portal. And then she can just hand you a map that color codes what the projects are.
So little volunteer fire departments don't have shape files. I point at maps.
Well, so the planners give the shape files to Denise. And even if you just draw it on a map, Denise can put it in there for you. But then you have all of them for the whole entire county in one spot. And you
So-
can just click and say, this is different projects.
So Denise, do you have shape files for the Trinity Camps project from the Forest Service?
I got shape files from the Forest Service, but I don't know if that project is in there. I'll have to look.
It wasn't a really clean process of breaking out the different project areas into the different, I guess, jurisdictions. And so, yeah, I could go over that with you, Carol, and straighten that out. But for the shape files, do you want like specific treatment units or overall boundaries, or what exactly are you looking for there?
Overall boundaries is fine.
Okay. Yeah, I can get those to you for the
Great.
Bowerman project.
And if you've had a chance to look at the online CWPP application viewer, all of the partner projects that have been submitted to me so far are on there. So if you're looking for a particular project like that, you might be able to find it in there quicker than I find it.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Let's see. So Blaze, you're still hanging in there. Do you have some information for us about the Willow Creek Fire Safe Council?
Yeah, hi, I do. So we had a meeting. Amelia was there. Isabel Emmett was there. The county is looking at a $500,000 emergency grant funding through CAL FIRE to facilitate some fuel reduction and some hazard tree removal projects out in this area. And the reason that we'd all met together was because some of that work is going to be spilling into Trinity County. So far, we have a date for the submission of the grant, which is, I believe, March 4th. So that's next Friday. Some of the funds are going to be used to establish a coordinator position within the Fire Safe Council to sort of help us build capacity. You know, the people who have been running our Fire Safe Council have been running it for a long time, and there are a lot of new people, and we don't really have a lot of structure. We're going through a lot of sort of like house cleaning right now, moving offices around and sort of taking a lot of the workload off some of the older members and putting it onto the younger members. So that's going to definitely help us in sort of coordinating these projects, because the coordination is going to lie with the Willow Creek Fire Safe Council. In terms of the contracting, that is going to be through the county. We've sort of made our voices very clear on this. We do want to exercise a local hiring practice if we can, or I believe it was dubbed sort of like a best value contracting, because we do want to make sure that this money goes to people in this community who can do this work. For me, like, I see it as these people have gone through the disaster. They know what this area needs. They've worked in these woods before. I'm hoping that in addition to the fact that these people won't have to travel into town, and they could actually spend all of their days actually working in the area, and at the end of the day go home rather than travel out to the coast or be concerned about per diem. So I think that would help stretch the budget. There is going to be a lot of focus on removing like the hazard trees, which is going to be, I think, a big deal for a lot of people around here because of the rural nature of our roads. We've got some ingress egress problems with hazard trees over driveways. And, you know, we had this snowstorm come through in this last week, this smaller one. I think there was a real fear that a lot of the trees that hadn't fallen already were going to. So it's nice to see that, you know, we have this potential for the funding, and I'm really excited to sort of get to work on it. I know, Amelia, that you had mentioned potentially doing some like small scale mentoring. I know you're busy, but I do think we would really appreciate that. I would appreciate that in particular, because I am very new to all of this. So that's kind of where the Fire Safe Council's at.
So Blaze and Amelia, do you think it would be helpful to have a letter of support from the Trinity County Fire Safe Council for their CAL FIRE grant application?
I don't think it would hurt. I think that would be lovely.
So I'll add more chores for Amelia, but if she can take another letter of support that we sent and just edit it, I don't see why we wouldn't want to send a letter of support for your grant application too. So,
Anyone opposed?
yeah, is that okay with everybody?
Thumbs up.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Approved.
will do.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Blaze?
I mean, just general housekeeping business over here. We do have a corned beef and cabbage dinner on Friday, March 11th. If anybody is in town, you can go to the VFW hall.
Okay.
It was also just decided with Sawyer VSC in an email right now that I will be at Sawyer at 1 p.m. on March 12th. It's a very busy weekend down there to talk with Sawyer about some CWPP stuff. So hopefully I can try to hit a couple different events.
Okay, and then let's see.
That's great.
Dina, oh, I'm sorry. Any questions for Blaze? All right, Dina, do you want to give us an update on what you guys are doing? Sorry, we didn't add you to the updates. We will add you.
What we are doing is our tribe is gives feedback to Humboldt County, Trinity County, Caltrans, the Heritage Commission. There's a federal project going into Denny for road repairs, and what we're asked to do is weigh in on all of those things. And one of the things that we do is when it's not in our Aboriginal territory, which is the area from Berry Summit to Cedar Flat, we refer the people who are asking for input and it's usually regarding cultural resources. And we refer them to the local tribe. And I was thinking as Mr. March was talking that the Norelmuk people he needs to contact them because that road project is in their Aboriginal territory, and there may be some sites that are sensitive for them that they would want to be aware of, just like the spotted owl and other things. But everybody keeps us pretty busy with those kinds of activities. In addition, we've been trying to get rid of all the down trees and brush and all of that, and been thankful for PG&E and Wright and Trinity County RCD and Willow Creek Fire Safe Council for the chipping they're doing, and Trinity County Roads came out and cleared Denny Road so that the bus can get here again. And so there's been a lot of cleanup happening, and I was really happy to hear that that PG&E grant is going in, because now I don't have to figure out how to write that proposal. So we stay busy.
So Dina, do you have an update on kind of concerns or questions that you guys might have about the rebuilding of the Ironside Lookout?
We are in contact with Shasta Trinity National Forest. Our direct contact is Matt Padilla, who's the tribal liaison. And we have been working with Shasta Trinity on some communication towers. One is for Burnt Ranch School. We've been working on that one for years, and we were almost to the point where it was going to go in, but then the mountain burnt. So we're starting that again. And then Shasta Trinity also contacted us about an emergency communication tower that they would like to put in. And so we're finalizing the site there. Nothing is happening at this point because there's snow on the mountain with the lookout. And I think it's going to be a complex problem that we'll be looking at with the forest.
Okay, well, thank you for that update. Does anybody else have an update that I missed on the list?
I got one in my, putting my California Fire Safe Council board member hat on. I think there was a email blast in the last day or so announcing their 2022 SRA grant application process is just opening up. So if you aren't on that email blast list and are interested, I think just go to California Fire Safe Council's website and get the information.
SRA.
SRA, State Responsibility Area.
So what kind of
That's
stuff is that?
That's what they've always done, which is it's the federal money that's used to do defensible space and shaded fuel breaks and all that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's all the project updates. If I remember correctly, Amelia will not be here next month, March.
That sounds right.
So does that mean that Denise and I get to talk about?
Maya's gonna help run the meeting.
But the Zone Haven issue presentation.
Yes, I'll touch base with Denise and get that squared away.
Okay, all right. So I think that's it. We'll see you all next month.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.